Why am I even watching this anime instead of reading the original manga? This is a question I increasingly find myself asking as I get older and my free time exponentially begins to dwindle. Why would I invest 3 hours of my time to watch a 12-episode anime series when I could probably read the original manga in less than an hour? I sifted through and dropped a bunch of anime adaptations over the years, but in watching Bocchi the Rock, for the first time in a long time, I found an adaptation I can wholeheartedly recommend watching over reading the original manga. Of course, there are cases where there is no prior source material, so you have to watch the anime to experience the story, but that tends to be the exception rather than the norm. But Bocchi the Rock stands as a prime example of what makes an anime adaptation worth viewing over the original manga, specifically in its unique blend of experimental animation techniques in concert of its superb sound design. The Bocchi the Rock anime creates an adaptation that far surpasses the original source material and gives it a reason for being over its original manga counterpart. Bocchi the Rock is a prime example of what the key to a successful anime adaptation is. It lies not merely in visual fidelity as some people seem to believe, but in the use of the properties of the visual medium to their fullest to create a unique experience. To be clear, the Bocchi the Rock manga is not bad by any stretch of the imagination, but I imagine you would be hard-pressed to find a large population of people who had heard of Bocchi the Rock before the anime aired. The characters are fun, as well as the story, but it's hardly the pinnacle of its genre. Bocchi the Rock is one of the few cases where I can wholeheartedly endorse watching the anime over reading the manga. Curiously, Bocchi the Rock is probably not what comes to mind when people talk about a show being quote-unquote well animated, especially when you look at some of the more mundane scenes. The backgrounds are visually detailed, but that's because they're digital scans of photographs from the Tokyo area, leading to backgrounds that are completely static and reliant on foreground movement of the characters. There are cases where the CGI looks a little bizarre, and the show is clearly not immune from the cost-saving techniques that have become ubiquitous in the anime industry. If you watch carefully, you'll see no shortage of still frames and somewhat suspicious camera angles, both designed to save time, effort, and money. Oftentimes, the animation becomes intentionally bad as a way to reinforce certain story-related gags. Despite this, there's no shortage of people praising the animation and direction of Bocchi the Rock. When you ask people what makes good animation, you often get a response about shows being animated with a very high level of visual fidelity. For instance, Ufotable is a highly praised animation studio because of the remarkable beauty of most of their works, particularly in their action scenes. When people talk about bad animation, they often refer to weird-looking in-between frames or egregious cost-cutting measures, like over-reliance on still images. Of course, there are cases where an anime can look so cheaply made and so visually off-putting as to completely ruin your enjoyment of the product. Looking at you, Berserk 2016. But I want to make the case that simple visual fidelity is not, and has never been, the primary goal of the anime medium. And it is precisely this willingness to detach from highly realistic animation techniques that has defined anime. To understand what I mean by this, it's useful to have a brief discussion of the history of animation techniques, and anime. I am by no means an expert on animation, or even particularly well-versed or skilled in the arts, so this explanation might be a little rough, but it's necessary to understand the goals and backgrounds of anime as a medium and what makes Bocchi the Rock shine above its compatriots. As a gross oversimplification, before the advent of computers, all animation was drawn by hand. These drawings would then be transferred onto plastic sheets called cells, and then photographed and played back in sequence to create the appearance of movement. Traditional 2D animation can be broadly classified between full and limited styles of animation. As the name implies, the goal of full animation is the creation of fluid and realistic movement, a goal not shared by limited animation. Prior to the 1960s, the animation market was dominated by Disney in the West, and in Japan by Toei Animation, as well as its predecessor, Nihon Doga. Both companies were heavily focused on producing polished, full animations, as can be seen in classic Disney cartoons from this era. One of the most clear ways the difference between full and limited animation manifests was that full animation requires the drawing of completely unique frames for every frame in the animation, whereas the first limited animation shows would reuse the same image for 3 frames. This is referred to as 3-frame shooting and was ubiquitous among early anime. Other limited animation techniques include the use of stop images, or still frames, sectioning, where only a part of a scene or character is animated moving instead of drawing an entirely new frame, or repetition, where a series of frames are reused for sequences like walking or running. Even though anime has been made by computers for years now, you can still see many of these limited animation techniques at work in modern anime. While it has its predecessors, the first widespread use of limited animation was the seminal 1963 anime Astro Boy, one of the most famous and consequential anime ever created. Due to the economic and time constraints of producing new weekly episodes of Astro Boy, the anime makes extensive use of limited animation techniques to save money and manpower. Astro Boy and other anime from this era rely heavily on limited animation techniques that convey the sense of movement while remaining largely still. In his book Anime's Media Mix, Mark Steinberg, professor of cinema studies at Concordia University, refers to this interplay between stillness and motion that is characteristic of anime as dynamic immobility. One of the most classic examples of dynamic immobility would be when a samurai or other swordsman cuts an object. As a way to highlight the swordsman's incredible precision and speed, the object almost always remains still for a second before cleanly splitting apart. It is this stillness that helps to enhance the sense of motion, despite the fact that when you cut something in real life, it obviously doesn't stay still before splitting apart. While this sense of dynamic immobility and application of limited animation techniques is the result of the economic and production constraints in most anime, it's in these limited animation techniques that anime becomes, well, anime. Consider the iconic image of Gendo from Neon Genesis Evangelion with its hands crossed beneath his face. This image is iconic because of its frequent appearances in Eva, but this was the result of a limited animation technique known as a bank system, where a cell is drawn and then reused several times on different backgrounds. On the flip side, while anime often incorporates a sense of stillness, manga does the opposite to create a sense of movement out of a still medium. For example, consider the use of speed lines that create the sense of movement despite the fact that the image is still very still. Or consider how manga very frequently changes angles and perspectives from frame to frame. This sounds trite, but this wasn't always the case. It was actually Tezuka Osamu, famed creator of Astro Boy, that pioneered this idea of making manga feel as though it was moving. Previously, the way manga was created was highly reminiscent of early cinema. Scenes would generally use one fixed angle and distance from the characters. It was Tezuka who experimented with the idea of using multiple angles and spatial distances in his manga. As one manga critic succinctly put it, whereas previously one scene was equal to one frame, Tezuka created a style where one scene was equal to multiple frames. It was these innovations, among others, that allowed Astro Boy to convey a remarkable degree of motion for a still medium. The intense popularity of the Astro Boy anime actually puzzled producers at the time, who wondered why audiences so readily accepted the limited animation of Astro Boy compared to the highly fluid full animation that was the norm at the time. Steinberg argues that the answer to this question lies in the interplay between manga and anime. As he explains, the quote, feat of limited anime was not only making still images feel like they were moving, but also making moving images feel like they were still, end quote. It's not through the creation of highly realistic, smooth animation that makes viewers feel as though their favorite manga has come to life. It's through the deliberate use of stillness to bring continuity to the original manga that defines modern anime. This continuity is important for the business implications of what's referred to as media mix, or the serialization of entertainment franchises across many mediums like television, books, manga, toys, and video games. The dynamic immobility of anime helps bring continuity with the other aspects of the media franchise, and encourages the sale of character goods like figurines, posters, or keychains, as well as sales of the original source material. This is relevant because anime itself is often not a particularly large moneymaker, resulting in anime sometimes being seen as a kind of glorified advertisement to drive sales to more profitable aspects of the media mix. The unfortunate consequence here is that this kind of business incentive often does not leave room for a particularly creative or inventive use of the unique audiovisual medium that anime provides. Manga naturally provides a storyboard for an anime to work off of, which is why when you compare any anime adaptation of a manga, you can usually very clearly see what scene is being adapted. Particularly when you're working with a well-established and popular source material, it's very tempting to just play it safe with the anime, churn out something with passable production values and popular voice talent, and then you sit back and let the anime coast off the popularity and quality of the original manga. But what this creates is a whole host of anime adaptations that feel more like animated versions of the original manga rather than a unique anime version of the manga. This brings us back to the original question of what makes an anime worth watching over its manga originator. If most anime exists simply to evoke a sense of the manga, why should I even bother watching the anime? The difference between an average adaptation and one that is truly special lies in their ability to experiment with and play with the medium of animation to enhance the original story. One of the key innovations of anime's limited animation was how it was able to break free of the ideology of realism that defined full animation and created a whole new style and aesthetic. While creating a work that is visually appealing and enjoyable to look at will no doubt create an anime that is fun to watch, it's through experimenting with the balance of anime and animation techniques that you can create a series that stands apart from the source material. To bring it back to Bocchi the Rock, the most memorable aspects of the show are its many Bocchi time sequences that employ a variety of often surreal scenes and animation techniques to reinforce Bocchi's social anxiety. The intersplicing of claymation, live action, minimalist, among other animation styles are not only highly entertaining, but dynamically reinforce to the viewer the depths of Bocchi's social anxiety. It's through these Bocchi time sequences that the show is able to turn what is otherwise a one-panel passing gag from the manga into something memorable and visually striking. Take the Tsuchinoko gag from when Kezoku-ban goes to take group pictures in episode 4. The original scene for the manga is only 8 panels long, but the scene became one of the most memorable parts of the entire anime through its creative use of animation and audio design. Bocchi's disassociation and flaying around on the ground vividly drives home her social isolation. When Kita suggests that Bocchi open her own social media account, Bocchi and the show begin to break down in dramatic fashion, as if the video itself were experiencing some kind of error. The use of inventive animation is not only narratively interesting and artistically illustrates how deep Bocchi's social instability goes, but it's also visually striking in a way that the original source material is often not. This inventive animation also helps to disguise instances of cost-saving limited animation techniques from the viewers. While the show is no stranger to limited animation, I barely noticed it on my first viewing because of how seamless it often is. Take Sick Hack's performance in episode 10. Funnily enough, there is extremely little animated footage of Sick Hack playing. There's a small bit at the beginning with short shot lengths and zoomed in angles, likely to save time to work on Kesoku-ban's beautifully animated performance during the Culture Festival. Instead, the scene is mostly composed of stop images imposed over computer-animated psychedelic background effects. One because Sick Hack plays psychedelic rock, but it also serves as a way to visually show how the performance impacts Bocchi. We see how she goes from being perturbed by the environment to the crowd visually melting away as Bocchi becomes completely enraptured in the music and divorced from her surroundings. The scene was likely conceived in part out of an inability to invest significant resources in animating Sick Hack's performance, but the end result is actually more narratively effective and visually interesting than if they had cobbled together some CGI. This is a good segue into how the music and sound design work in concert with the animation. The music from Bocchi is extremely good. The studio went out of its way to get many famous Japanese musicians to work on the soundtrack. Taniguchi Maguro, lead vocalist for Kanaboom of Naruto fame, wrote and composed the first ending, Distortion. Nakajima Ikkyu, vocalist and guitarist for the math rock band Tricot, wrote and composed the second ending, Kata Kata. Kitazawa Yuho, lead vocalist and guitarist of The Peggies, known for their openings of Bunny Girl Senpai and Rent a Girlfriend, wrote and composed the third ending, Nani ga Warui. The lyrics for Gita to Kodoku to Aoi Hoshi and Wasudeta Yaranai were written by Zack, known for her work on the Chunibyo series. One of the key advantages of anime over manga is, of course, that anime is both an auditory as well as visual medium. It's no coincidence that many music-focused anime, like Bocchi the Rock, K-On!, Hibike Euphonium, or Your Boy Kongming, are generally considered better than their original source material. What's amazing about Bocchi the Rock is the incredible effort and attention to detail that went into the audio and visual design, allowing them to mesh seamlessly with the narrative, both mutually reinforcing each other. Take for instance the first time Kesoku-ban auditions to earn the right to perform at Starry. When you look at Kita playing the guitar, she looks stiff and unnatural. Compare this to Bocchi, whose guitar playing is much more fluid. A nice bit of visual storytelling to reinforce how Kita is still a novice at the guitar compared to Bocchi's extensive experience. At the end of their performance, Nijika's sister gives them all advice. She tells Kita and Bocchi to stop looking down so much. She tells Nijika to stop looking so tense. She tells Ryo to have greater awareness of her bandmates. Now fast forward to the episode 12 performance of Seiza ni Naretara. Gone is Kita's stiff and unnatural strumming, reflective of the effort she's put into practice. Furthermore, we also see her spending more time looking up and directly at the audience instead of down at her guitar. Nijika looks significantly more relaxed behind her drum set. When Bocchi's guitar string snaps, Ryo has the awareness to turn and cue Nijika into repeating the last 8 bars of the song so Bocchi can get her chance at the guitar solo. Through the girls' glances and non-verbal communication, we can see just how much more in sync and comfortable they've become playing with each other. The visuals and audios work seamlessly in this performance to convey just how far Kesoku Band has come since their first performance together. The sheer degree of effort and attention to detail that went into all of Kesoku Band's performances is truly remarkable. My understanding is that the band is animated correctly to match whatever song they're playing, though I don't have the musical knowledge to confirm or deny this. An obvious example that even a greenhorn like myself can notice is that Nijika's hitting the cymbals is correctly synced to the songs. When you hear them play, the audio is panned to give the impression that the viewer is watching from the audience. Bocchi's guitar plays out of the right ear, and Ryo's bass plays out of the left. When we watch them play for a real live audience for the first time, you can hear that the song is a little off-tempo and that the members are out of sync with each other. In all of their performances, the shadows and lighting dynamically move, giving the sense that they're really being lit by the stage. There's this wonderful moment towards the end of the performance of Seiza ni Naretara, where after Bocchi successfully recovers from a string snapping, we hear her take a deep breath and stare upwards directly into the lights before finishing off the song. A simple but potent way of relieving the tension built by the string snapping fiasco. When they finish playing, we finally see Bocchi look directly into the crowd for the first time. The rapturous applause of the audience slowly fades out, and the audio focuses in on Bocchi's slow and deep breaths, as we see her soak in the performance she and her friends just gave. It's all of these details, the breathing, the glances, the musical flourishes, that makes these scenes so memorable. All details that there would be simply no way to convey in a manga panel. Bocchi the Rock's adaptation is what I wish more anime adaptations would be like. The show is clearly a labor of love, born of a production staff who intuitively and deeply understand the feelings and story of the original manga. From interviews, we know that the animation director has been a huge fan of the manga since the very beginning, and that familiarity and respect for the original source material shines through. Rather than just string together the original 4-koma manga and add some music and vocals, the show uses the unique characteristics of anime as a medium to bring the manga to life with details and techniques only possible in video. Funny enough, this level of experimentalism and creativity is likely only possible coming from a lesser-known source material. After all, why bother taking the risk of a Chainsaw Man, a Spy Family, or a Gomi-San? Bocchi the Rock is a masterclass in adaptation, and what makes anime as a medium special, and how much more an anime adaptation can be than just a long-form commercial for books and character goods.